and I'm delighted to welcome you here today. OEC's Forum for Business and the Environment Speaker Series began in 1995 and has brought thousands of business, environmental, social justice, and government leaders together to explore key and cutting-edge issues important to Oregon's environment and economy. We are delighted to have an audience from throughout Oregon today, which includes legislative offices, local governments, many nonprofit group leaders, and of course, the business community. I wanted to say a special thank you to our lead sponsor, Soder Vineyards. Soder has supported OEC for over 15 years. They created Planet Oregon, a signature Pinot Noir, and a bubbly rosé, and dedicated a portion of each bottle sale to OEC. This year, they deepened their commitment by pledging 1% of sales to furthering our mission. I also wanted to say thank you to our other sponsors, the Port of Portland, Intel, and AWS for your support and for being in the audience today. Thank you as well to Senator Sullivan, Senator Woods, Representative Tran, and Representative Anderson's offices for your interest in today's program. And of course, we deeply, deeply appreciate Representative Emerson Levy for joining us today, as well as our other panelists. I wanted to take a moment and just reflect on the fact that legislative leadership has been crucial for new clean energy economic development in Oregon. This goes all the way back to the 1990s when Oregon made a purposeful choice to become a leader in energy efficiency programs and incentives. We continued that leadership in the mid-2000s when Oregon adopted our first renewable energy targets, and then recently expanded those opportunities through passage of the 100% Clean Energy for All bill in 2021. Oregon has also adopted programs and incentives that create demand for and rewards innovation in clean cars and clean fuels. And each of these initiatives has created good-paying jobs, benefited our air and climate, and supported community health. Many parts of the business community have been partners along the way as well. And in fact, earlier this week at the Oregon Business Summit, a survey showed that climate ranks third as a topic of interest at that gathering. Having these programs in place also gives Oregon a competitive advantage in pulling down competitive federal funding, which you'll hear more about later. And then just recently, internationally, the world came together at COP28 and made some remarkable commitments to phasing off of fossil fuels, tripling renewable energy, and supporting a just transition, all creating a global economy around a renewable energy transition. So I am very excited for today's program. Just a little note to our webinar participants. We invite you to submit questions using the Q&A function below. And while we'll endeavor to get to as many questions as possible, we may not be able to get to them all. As always, we appreciate you keeping your questions relevant and respectful. I'm now going to hand this over to OEC's Senior Program Director for Climate, Nora Apter. She'll begin moderating today's event. Thank you again to everyone for joining us, and we look forward to a great program today. Thanks, Nora.
Thank you, Jana. And yes, thank you all for joining us. Before I turn it over to Representative Levy, I wanted to just share a few words about why I personally am so excited about today's conversation around Oregon's opportunity to lead in clean energy technology. As you mentioned, Jana, Oregon has made some really incredible progress in recent years to advance new laws and investments that will drive down emissions from some of our top polluting sectors. By setting the path to decarbonize our transportation system, our electric grid, our homes and buildings, these policies will support local economic vitality and job creation for green construction workers, solar installers, HVAC and electric vehicle technicians, and beyond. To put a fine point on that, I want to call out some recent independent modeling by Energy Innovation, which found that if well implemented, Oregon's recently adopted climate policies will add nearly 10,000 jobs and $2.5 billion to Oregon's GDP by 2050. At the same time, thanks to the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, we also have an unprecedented federal funding opportunity with investments available to help bolster our existing climate programs and create equitable access to the clean energy economy. And while there's been a lot of discussion focused on the hundreds of billions of dollars available in demand-side incentives for individuals and businesses to adopt clean, efficient appliances, zero-emission vehicles, and renewable energy, less attention has been given to the really significant supply-side incentives for the production of these clean technologies. Together with Oregon's existing climate policies, these new federal incentives for domestic manufacturing across the clean energy supply chain create a critical opportunity for Oregon to lead in producing and procuring innovative technologies that the entire world is seeking right now in the transition to a clean energy future. For example, as Oregon is working to deliver on its 100% clean electricity mandate, we also have the opportunity to attract and sustain new and existing companies that manufacture microturbines or energy storage components to support our grid. Or as the state works to accelerate the transition to efficient and electric homes and buildings, we can and should simultaneously ramp up in-state production of technologies like heat pumps and solar panels, which are in ever increasing demand nationwide. Likewise, as auto manufacturers are working to deliver on our state policy to deliver 100% zero emission and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, we have the opportunity to support manufacturing of those vehicles, the components, materials, and infrastructure right here in Oregon. Right now, companies across the world are seeking to harness federal incentives to expand or establish their clean technology businesses and manufacturing facilities in the United States. And I know we're all eager to drive as much of this economic growth and job creation and prosperity to Oregon communities as possible. So that's what today's conversation is all about. With that, I'm so honored to introduce Oregon State Representative Emerson Levy, who has been an important leader in the legislature to support economic development and growth in Oregon's clean energy economy and beyond. Representative Levy represents House District 53, which includes North Bend, South Redmond, Sisters, Eagle Crest, and Black Butte. She serves on the Housing and Homelessness Committee, Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee for Natural Resources, and is the Vice Chair of the House Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee. Rep. Levy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Nora, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Like Nora said, I'm Representative Levy, and I'm here in Central Oregon. And I represent such a diverse and wonderful part of the state. And a lot of our work here we do is with clean energy. We have the sun and lots of great resources. And when we talk about the legislature and where we're headed and what our values are, I feel like one of the most important things we can talk about is our values and what we're rooted in. And I believe that we're moving into a new generation of environmental policy, which is that we have to build and we have to innovate and we have to create an environment which we can decarbonize our state, our world, and our planet. And the question is what will Oregon's role be in that? And it will take work. There are investments, there are incentives, there are a huge amount of dollars into these big environmental, renewable, clean energy projects, and they are competitive. And so I really want to focus on how the Oregon legislator can play a role in that, and how if we don't go get these dollars, another state will. And so the effort is necessary, and encouraging your lawmakers to make sure that we bring these $1 billion worth of investments to our own state, and to ensure that a lot of it, when appropriate, is built here in Oregon. So we're building Oregon jobs and building Oregon clean tech. So Nora spoke a little bit about the bill we brought last session. I just want to go over it briefly. So it was the Oregon Clean Tech Bill, which had 3 elements, which are incentives, procurement, and a task force. So the incentive part was to award loans, grants, incentives to establish clean technology manufacturing. Like Nora said, we hear a lot about EVs and other incentives like that, which are really important. But we also, there's a lot of money out there for bringing manufacturing to Oregon. And those are good family wage jobs. So the other second part of the bill was procurement, which is to develop a statewide policy for evaluating and procuring zero emission technologies, and then a task force to identify additional strategic policy mechanisms and tools for Oregon to attract and grow and sustain clean technology. And I know you're going to hear today first from some business owners that have experienced in their own business where these incentives can help and what can help them stay in Oregon. Again, this is something that we have to work towards. When we talk about this new age of environmentalism, I think it looks a lot different than it has in the past, where we can invite more friends in, where we can follow the lead of other European countries and Scandinavia that have the the theme of being greener, richer, and freer. And I think this is what a just transition looks like, that we can be greener, richer, and freer. And when we focus on that last part too, which is freer, the more clean energy we have, the more jobs we have domestically, the more that we are not buying energy from foreign sources that could be adversarial to us or to our friends. I think that's really important and a really important part of the green technology, that we will be the owners of our own energy. So as Nora said, there's just so many opportunities in Oregon to build clean energy, and we are being outdone by our partners to the north in Washington and California. And so it's kind of a siren call to say we need to do more. We have to do more. If we are going to meet our clean energy goals, we have to get serious about transmission. We have to get serious about making sure that we're matching every dollar that we can get federal funds. These federal funds are already in a lot of ways out the door. And so really just encouraging your lawmakers and our governor's office to put this as a priority and to say, not only do we need the incentives, the natural incentives like the EVs and heat pumps and things like that, but there are things on the manufacturing side that we can do to bring jobs here to Oregon and to be part of our clean energy future. I think this is really important, not only to build our economy now and to diversify our economy, but I have a 9-year-old daughter who I cannot believe is 9. And we deserve to leave them a world better than we found it, and not just clean air and clean water, which is essential, but a good economy, and build a good economy that is built on our values, which is to be greener, richer, and freer. So thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and please feel free to reach out to my office if I can be of further help in any way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative Levy. We really appreciate you being here to set the stage for today's conversation and for all of your work to support sustained economic growth and family wage job creation in the clean tech economy. Thank you for your leadership. With that, I'm excited to welcome our first panelist, Rochelle Ames. In her role as Vice President of Economic Development for the Clean Tech Alliance, Rochelle leads the BUILT cluster, focused on accelerating the decarbonization of the built environment. She also leads the Alliance's entrepreneur support programs, including co-directing the Department of Energy award-winning Cascadia Clean Tech Accelerator with joint program partner Virtue Lab. Rochelle represents the Clean Tech Alliance on the DOE Energy Program for Innovation Clusters, supported Northwest Clean Tech Innovation Network. Rochelle is going to kick us off with an overview of some of the big trends and opportunities to support economic growth in clean tech, including lessons learned from other states and how Oregon can meet this moment and really become a leader in producing these ever-in-demand clean technologies. With that, I will hand it over to Rochelle and just remind folks to please use the Q&A function as questions come to you. We look forward to discussion at the end of the presentation. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Nora, and thank you to OEC for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm really excited to participate, and also excited to, on my own, also learn a little bit more about the Oregon clean tech ecosystem. Like Nora mentioned, we've been longtime partners with Virtue Lab on some innovation programs that I'll talk about a little bit. But it's been a learning experience for me on the Oregon policy side, and really excited about the strides that have been taken in the state, and really want to be a resource as much as possible. So I'm only going to have a little bit of time to touch on some pieces, but want to kind of do a little bit of get you guys thinking and thinking of other ecosystems that are thriving in the clean tech space. But I'm going to start with an overview of the Clean Tech Alliance for those of you that are not familiar with us. We are a nonprofit. Let's see if I can advance it. There we go. We are a nonprofit trade association based in Seattle, Washington, although I am coming to you from Richland, Washington, and Tri-Cities in central Washington here. We have over 1,000 member companies spanning 17 states and 4 Canadian provinces. And we are that big tent convening organization that has large industry members like Mitsubishi and Boeing, and also accounts our research institutions, national labs, and universities, as well as regional government, service providers, funders, capital providers, loan program offices, small business and emerging technology startups. You'll hear a little bit more about that here coming up. And then we rely on a lot of partnerships with our nonprofits and other non-governmental organizations, which is another takeaway that I want to emphasize for my presentation, is that we can't do this on our own. We really need to be bringing together all of these pieces and players to decarbonize and reduce emissions and make sure. And I loved the ethos on cleaner, greener, and more sustainable and freer. I love that piece, Representative Levy, and so I'm excited to add that one into my repertoire as well. And then we ground our work into really making sure that clean technology businesses can thrive no matter what part of the commercialization ecosystem that they're in. And we do that again through partnerships. None of what we do, and to kind of explain this graphic a little bit, at the bottom is some of the programs and where we play in those, but those are all with partners. So don't think that we're doing this all on our own. This is through partnerships and players, and a lot of it's through our members and programs that they do as well. But clean technology commercialization is challenging. It's especially challenging when you have a manufacturing business, and especially if it's connected into hardware pieces and development and new technology. So really want to impress that to have a thriving clean tech ecosystem and where we're really seeing that full spectrum of innovation happen, there needs to be resources, funding, policy incentives, carrots and sticks as well in all of these different valleys where we do see challenges. And I will touch on the beginning piece of that and use a little bit of some other folks' words on the importance of continuing the innovation journey and process, and focusing that on climate-focused entrepreneur accelerators and incubators. And so this is from a report from the Startup Genome and the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and I'll make sure that this full report gets dropped into the chat. But wanted to emphasize some existing programs that we have and where we see those programs going so that they can take advantage of the federal dollars that are coming in and that are available to states as well. So we have the Northwest Clean Tech Innovation Network. This is a partnership led by Virtue Lab, which is based in Portland, Oregon, but does now function regionally as well. So you may all be familiar with them, as well as the Washington Clean Energy Test Beds centered at the University of Washington Clean Energy Institute. And through some Department of Energy funding, we've been able to create this consortia of 4 programs that really help our most early stage entrepreneurs building out their technology and their manufacturing business, identifying initial needs for funding through the Federal Funding Assistance Program. Our Cascadia Clean Tech Accelerator program that Nora mentioned is also within this, as well as connections for demonstration and pilot projects through the Washington Clean Energy Test Beds as well. And so we're beginning to see, going back to our graphic, that's really in the first kind of, I went too far, apologies. That's really where you're seeing it in the startup formation, Valley 2 spinouts, and product development. What we're now also looking at is processes and programs and funding opportunities that are in the scaling and market validation and into adoption as well. And again, we can put all of the resources that we can into that early stage, but if we're not helping them throughout the continued commercialization development, we won't get to the end goal of adoption and widespread adoption. We want to make sure that not just a few people can adopt these technologies, that all communities, and especially those communities that are most impacted and most historically impacted by climate change, have that technology accessible to them to help them have that cleaner, greener, freer future as well. But at the same time, we can't just focus on the innovation at the early stage. We also have to be looking at existing corporations and government entities and industries and helping them connect with those innovators, and also creating incentives and carrots and processes that they can adopt those technologies. We have quite a few technologies within our membership that they have been initially de-risked. There are projects on the ground. We have a couple around sewer heat recovery and waste heat, and there's only 5 projects in the Northwest. Why? people don't know about it, and there aren't the right incentives in places to do more of those projects. And so that's another place where we can look at on a technology by technology basis that there are some other incentive structures that need to be created as well. And then I just wanted to kind of look at some folks to thrive or to strive for, as well as looking at what do those folks do well, really briefly. So in North America, and I'm going to focus on North America because that's where I'm most familiar with, but also encourage everyone to look at some of the other ecosystems that are being named in this report and dig in more into this report as you're looking at what Oregon can be doing, what your organization can be doing, how can your industry play in this as well. So we have Silicon Valley and Los Angeles in California, Boston and Massachusetts, New York City in New York State, and Vancouver in British Columbia. All of those top 5 ecosystems in North America have a culture of venture capital funding and private funding married with very stringent climate goals and policies, as well as state or municipality funding for the implementation of those projects. They also are able to offer a lot of resources for emerging technology companies to develop those technologies within the state. We have quite a few member companies that are working in some of those areas, and the reason is because the market has been developed there, and so they may still have a headquarters in Washington State or in the region, but they also are looking at putting secondary offices or manufacturing facilities in New York, for example. There's definitely NYSERDA programs. The New York State Energy Research Development Authority has plenty of prize money, competitions, incentives to build out facilities in their state. And so even though we have entrepreneurs that want the life that we have here in the Northwest, they're being pulled to other regions that have these incentive programs and funding opportunities for them to really grow their business as well. So wanted to frame that up for this one, also because I know that this is kind of small and I don't know if you can see it, but I'll name off some of the other ones just to highlight some others that through this report at least are what they're showing as clean tech ecosystems to watch or that are thriving. In Europe, it's London. In the Middle East and North Africa is Tel Aviv. Asia, Singapore. Latin America, Sao Paulo. Sub-Saharan Africa is Nairobi, and Oceania is Sydney as well. And then I'll just briefly touch on this. This is where we probably would get into it more in the Q&A, but wanted to frame it up for you all and encourage questions on any of these policies. We do most of our work within Washington State on the policy angle. So happy to answer any questions about these and what has been done and where we see next kind of steps. And then additionally want to thank OEC for letting me kind of take this for my presentation and giving that overview as well for everyone. And I know that most folks on the call probably have further experience here than I do, but happy to also comment on them as well. And then just want to emphasize actually some of the same things that Representative Levy and OEC have also said is that we have a lot of the backbone in the Northwest, and Oregon does as well specifically, that can create thriving clean tech manufacturing ecosystems. I've mentioned a few things here. We have research institutions, national labs, and access to that talent and training. We have advanced manufacturing and trained workforce that we can lean on and those union jobs. We have a culture of innovation. We have clean and cheap energy. We do have capital providers or easy connections. It's not that hard for folks to fly to the Bay Area to attract some capital providers. And then we also, as we just mentioned and we'll continue to talk about, legislation and policy that are incentivizing our companies to build technology here. And then I'll take my last kind of about 5 minutes or so, and I'll try to wrap up a little bit earlier, just to highlight a program that has recently been launched in Washington State and goes with my ethos of collaboration and the need for that. In 2021, Washington State Department of Commerce launched the Innovation Cluster Accelerator Program, really looking at high growth areas and sectors. And we were really happy from the Clean Tech Alliance lens that about half of the clusters are focused on clean technology in some way, shape, or form. Our cluster that we lead is called the Built Cluster, and it's focused on decarbonization of buildings, buildings, construction, and industrial processes, and really looking at that from the lens of energy development or on the energy side, going into the grids that can then decarbonize the buildings, materials and end of life, and then efficiency and operations. And throughout those whole pieces, we making sure that the workforce and equity lenses are applied as well. Happy to talk a little bit more about our cluster specifically, but also the program. The way that we look at cluster economic development, and Representative Levy mentioned some of the Nordic models of economic development. This is where this piece has been taken from, it requires co-opetition or cooperative competition. We've encouraged our industry members to set aside some of that competition and say, hey, where can you work with your competitor, and what are some challenges that you can't solve on your own, or that you can't solve as quickly? So how can we do something more equitably, faster, cheaper, stronger, in a better climate lens than what you could do on your own? And we've been able to identify multiple challenges and working groups through that. The other place, and going back to kind of the ethos of this whole panel, is that this is how the federal government has looked at a lot of funding opportunities. They want to see these big consortia. They want to see the models where you're not just looking at one technology and one company and funding it. They want to see that you have a whole market developed out around it. What is the innovation and continuing innovation going to look like within that sector? What does the workforce development piece look like? How are you partnering with unions? How are you working with historically impacted communities and frontline communities? How are you making sure you're including them in the economic transition as well? So that's really where the whole consortium comes in, and not one company or organization can do it on our own. We have to come together to identify those and work together and be rowing in the same direction. Just will briefly put this up. Don't expect everyone to be able to read it, but there are other existing consortia programs going on that I can talk about as well, and happy to frame that up. Or please feel free to connect with me. I will have a slide up with my contact information if any of these are of interest, even outside of this panel as well. And again, emphasizing a few others that are already happening, and I'm sure I'm missing some. And I know there are others in development as well. But these are other pieces where if you're not already connected, but you're interested in any of these topic areas, I'm happy to connect with you. Some of these, majority of them are funded, but some have come up around funding opportunities that are still in existence, even though they did not get some of the federal funding. So there's still that opportunity to continue that industry engagement and that collaboration and co-opetition, even though the initial funding didn't come through, and encourage folks to continue to drive that as well. So here's my connection slide. Really encourage you to let me know what you're working on. Would be happy to connect you with anyone in our network, and really excited about the Q&A later. Thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Nora.
Thank you, Rochelle. That was an excellent kickoff to today's panel, and so exciting to hear about the Clean Tech Alliance's fantastic work to accelerate growth in the clean tech economy, and start to think about how we can advance similar efforts in Oregon. As a reminder to everyone in the audience, please do use the Q&A function to submit any questions as they come to you. We're really looking forward to a robust discussion at the end of our webinar. Next up, I'm pleased to welcome our second panelist, Robert Benjamin. Robert is the founder and CEO of Aris Hydronics, a Milwaukee, Oregon-based startup dedicated to making cleaner, more efficient, high-performance HVAC more affordable and accessible. Robert has over 20 years of experience as an inventor and entrepreneur, launching impact-driven businesses. Since childhood, where Robert grew up in rural Montana without electricity or running water, Robert has had a passion for improving the underlying systems that drive society to make them better for planet and people. Robert will provide a local perspective and share his experience and work with his early stage climate technology startup, Aris Hydronics. Thank you for being here, Robert. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Nora. And thank you for having me on this panel. It's really exciting to be out there talking about, I guess, what I'm already out there super passionate for, which is supporting clean tech entrepreneurs and endeavors within the state of Oregon, but outside as well in the Pacific Northwest. So I'll go through my slide deck, and then I'm looking forward to the questions after. So yes, I am the founder and CEO of Aris Hydronics. And I'm going to give a little sort of slice of my sort of personal journey. I think Nora actually gave part of it already, which is I did spend a lot of time growing up sort of thinking about how to make things better. And that could be inventions, but also just like systems that I saw that could be better. But Aris Hydronics really came out of a need as a father, a homeowner, and it took a number of years for our family to be able to afford to buy a home, and we moved to Milwaukee, Oregon. And like a lot of people, you can sort of choose things you want to have and things that you need to have. And one of the things that I really wanted to have with this home was a roof that I could put solar on, a backyard that my young boys could play in, and an environment that they could sort of get outside more. But things that we inherited, which you do a lot of times, is an HVAC system and certain things about the house that was not nominal, that what didn't really work really good. And this particular house was built in 1945. It was slab on grade with no insulation in that floor. Upstairs was poorly insulated, and I could tell it was going to be very uncomfortable. And one thing that it did have that I was excited about is it only had one gas appliance left. And I was on a sort of mission to get gas out of my house. That was sort of more my take on it. I just didn't want that in my house any longer, and I didn't want to see things just burning fuels that were sort of idly doing it without control. So I launched down the rabbit hole to find a better way to do it, and found that the things that were being offered, I didn't feel like were the best product, that were the best way to do it. And I also thought that if I could create something better, that my neighbors would want the same kind of system. And so we were able to get rid of our gas hot water heater that we started calling Fred. And this is my 4-year-old who started to use it as a canvas before it went off to the recycler. So ultimately, I just sort of discovered, just getting deeper into it, was that the majority of homes today, even though I think people sort of realize the problems more and more, are still relying on dirty thermal appliances, and that are appliances that burn fossil fuels, but they're also ones that are inefficient. And in that particular home, in our home, we actually had a bunch of wall electric resistance heaters, no AC, but and so that in itself is just a poor use of energy. So heat pumps, and especially when I was starting the business, it was sort of like talked about, but not to the level it is today, are really a big picture or a big piece of the answer. And it is because they're so much more efficient, but it also is because it provides a different kind of thermal energy, something that's much more controllable. And what most people don't realize is that there's actually a lot of different types of heat pumps, and that the heat pumps they might see around aren't the only type of heat pump, and maybe not even the best heat pump for certain applications. And one of the ones not pictured here is like a ground source heat pump. And so if you look at now that a lot of people are really realizing that the impact we can have if we push out sort of dirty appliances and increase efficiency, that it's really important to set targets. And so with the 25 governors setting sort of an impressive target of 20 million heat pumps in the next 7 years, and I think Oregon and Washington's portion, maybe I just estimated around 1 million of those heat pumps, that is a huge, huge lift, because there really is, you need a partner for that. You need building owners, you need homeowners, you need people to want the products, not necessarily prescribe it from the other side. And you can incentivize it, but my sort of belief is that if you want people to change, offer them something better. And by default, it should be better for the environment, and should be better for their neighbors. So what we're looking at today is that the majority of homes out there, and if you think about maybe 83 million single family homes, new builds, and a lot of really difficult to decarb multifamily buildings, need to transform. And sometimes they just need to transform because they have old systems that aren't working that good. And if you could provide them energy savings, provide them more control, and increase the safety and comfort of those buildings in a way that's affordable, that's how you could transform these. So, as we talk about support for the supply side, as opposed to just the sort of purchasing side of things, there is some funds that are coming out through the system that are hitting. But if you look on the West Coast, and especially in the Northwest, we don't see that yet. We're not seeing those because we haven't created, I guess, those consortium approach to making sure that we can capture all the support that's coming out. And I think there might be another round for this heat pump specific sort of manufacturing incentives. And I hope that we're able to get a group together to sort of go after those funds and make sure we can produce more of the products here. I want to mention that heat pumps are made up of a lot of sort of components that come from a lot of different places. And currently those components, the US is not a leader in the manufacturing of those. And if you look at that supply chain, there's actually huge opportunity in identifying things that we could do and we could do faster and we could maybe do better, and that fit within the overall need for these technologies. One thing that I do want to sort of address or point out sort of early on right here is that even though fossil fuels are sort of the thing we need to address the most and it has the most impact in taking out, let's say, 20 million gas appliances, we do have some other issues that have to be addressed early on. And that's what kind of refrigerants are being used in these new systems, whether they have chemicals that are harmful to the environment and humans, and whether there are better options. And right now, this is just a graphic that shows you if you did 20 million heat pumps in the different kind of systems, and one of them that we're working on, when I'll talk about our technology at Aris Hydronics, which we are looking for R290, which is a different kind of refrigerant that's a natural refrigerant, which actually has a super low GWP of below CO2. Your impact by changing out systems will actually be much better and cleaner. And I think there's huge opportunity in making cleaner systems, pushing it a little bit further. And that's what Aris Hydronics is all about. So we are an evolution in HVAC, or at least Aris Hydronics. The whole point of it was if I had to reinvent a better system, what would we do? And we are concentrating on using water as a superior thermal energy storage and delivery medium. We have a combi system that gives you everything you need in your home, so heating, cooling, and hot water in a much more efficient, much safer, much cleaner, and much more controllable way. And sort of from my viewpoint, I did this because I wanted a better system. I wanted one heat pump instead of multiple heat pumps, and I want something that would make my home more comfortable and that could be adapted to other homes. And I believe that other people want this. It just needs to be accessible and affordable. We have pilots that are running right now with a lot of data showing energy savings, showing CO2 emission reduction, and ultimately showing that we can produce really comfortable, enjoyable homes. We are part of a number of national accelerators through the Department of Energy. We're working with national labs. We're part of sort of organizations that are supporting building decarbonization. But we're actually finding that we're having less support here locally in the Pacific Northwest and in Oregon, and we would really love to change that. So we're currently a phase 1 winner of a $1 million prize that we're competing against 6 other teams now. And we're actually looking to bring that prize and that recognition to the Pacific Northwest, specifically to Milwaukee, Oregon, where we're located. And this is us. We got invited with my co-founder, Aline, to the National Mall through HUD, Housing Urban Development. And that's our presentation there. And it was a really amazing experience just to present the kind of technology we were doing and see the feedback from people just walking by in the National Mall. So I'm going to kind of end it here. And what we're trying to do and what's super important and why I say clean comfort for the future home is that as we're addressing climate change, as we're addressing the causes of climate change, we actually also have to be making more resilient indoor environments because we're going to be spending more time in there. And outdoor environments, including air quality, are going to get worse in the short term. And hopefully we can address that in the long term. But in the meantime, we need to make sure we safeguard our indoor environments. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Robert. I continue to be just so impressed by your innovation and also your success in navigating and leveraging federal investments, not to mention your commitment and all you're doing to really put Milwaukee and Oregon on the map as a leader in clean tech. Thank you. I'm now so pleased to introduce our final panelist, Alicia Chapman. Alicia is the owner and CEO of Willamette Technical Fabricators, a structural metal manufacturing company focused on custom, complex transportation and clean energy infrastructure projects. Prior to founding the business in 2020, Alicia led the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center research and development for Boeing, Daimler, and other industry partners. Alicia serves on the boards of Business for a Better Portland and Oregon Business for Climate, among others. In 2023, she was appointed by Governor Kotek to serve on the Oregon Commission for Women and Oregon Transportation Commission, and by Portland City Council to the Portland Clean Energy Fund Committee. Her company was named by Portland Business Journal as a Manufacturer of the Year in 2022, and she was named one of Portland's 40 under 40 in 2023. Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you, Nora. I will just say a little bit about our company beyond what has already been introduced. Willamette Technical Fabricators was founded in 2020, so we're just coming up on our 3-year birthday. Next slide, please. And as Nora mentioned, we focus on custom complex projects for transportation and clean energy infrastructure like bridges, hydropower dams, and wind energy. We are a certified woman and minority-owned disadvantaged small business and a registered Oregon benefit company. So that means we are legally committed to a triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Our commitment to people recognizes that the people most impacted by climate change are often left out of the clean technology economy. We're very intentional about building not only a greener economy, but also a more equitable one. So our workforce consists of over 1/3 of people who identify as women and people of color, including me, and we strive to create a truly inclusive workplace. Our on-the-job training program prioritizes entry-level apprentices from non-traditional backgrounds, particularly women, people of color, and people who have been affected by the criminal justice system. So we work very closely with community-based organizations to offer high-skill, high-wage, high-demand career opportunities to the communities that need them most. We have retained our employees with extremely low attrition thanks to transparent and highly competitive wages based on our budget, not on the candidate's job history, with an average annual base salary of over $100,000. We have on-the-job training, career advancement, and tuition support. We offer unlimited paid time off for our salary workers and flexibility for everyone to have a healthy work-life balance, especially parents and students. We offer the same comprehensive healthcare benefits for everyone with 90% company contributions for all employees and their families. We also offer 4% company match for 401k contributions and fully paid family medical leave for all genders. We are also, as I mentioned, committed to planet. So we support clean energy projects around the state and across the country. The picture on the left is a 70-ton gate that we built for a Columbia River hydropower dam. The picture on the right shows our staff working on robotic welding research that we're currently doing for the Department of Energy's Wind Energy Technology Office to help American manufacturing scale up to meet the literally massive demand for floating offshore wind and to be more competitive. In addition to our projects to build clean energy infrastructure, we take reducing our industrial carbon emissions very seriously. So we've strategically located our facilities to minimize the carbon impact of trucking and shipping heavy materials like steel plate. We recycle all of our scrap metal and purchase almost exclusively material that has been recycled and manufactured in the US. We adapted our production work schedules to 4 10-hour shifts, so people are commuting 20% less, and we support flexibility for everyone who's able to work from home to minimize carbon emissions from their commuting. We use high efficiency power sources for our equipment to minimize energy consumption and electric vehicles for our fleet. We are currently working with the Port of Portland to design a custom new facility that will be LEED Platinum certified, and we're hoping to leverage local and federal programs for industrial decarbonization to power our operations in this new building completely with solar energy. Next slide, please. Here's just a high-level overview or refresher of offshore wind for anyone who may not be familiar. Wind turbines are installed in large farms offshore in the ocean. The turbines are fixed directly to the seabed in shallow water or attached to a floating platform anchored to the seabed further offshore. Energy captured is transmitted by undersea cables to offshore substations and then from there into the onshore power grid. The total global offshore wind power capacity as of this year, the whole world, is 65 gigawatts. The US is actively building offshore wind on the East Coast and has a current capacity of about 34 megawatts, or 0.5% So very tiny. California is on track to be the first West Coast state with offshore wind. Here in Oregon, Governor Kotek is working with the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management on the proposed offshore wind leases off the southern coast. And I'm part of a task force that has been meeting around that and working on developing a roadmap for future Oregon wind. Next. So as I mentioned, fixed and floating platforms. Fixed offshore wind turbines are attached to the seabed directly in shallow water, usually less than 200 feet deep, like much of the US Atlantic coast. Floating offshore wind turbines are mounted to platforms which are anchored to the seabed by mooring cables in much deeper waters. The first US floating offshore wind turbines in California will be in waters more than half a mile deep, about 20 miles offshore. So the new market for floating offshore wind is driven by necessity, the need for more power and the ability of offshore wind to produce much more consistent and greater levels of energy, as well as economies of scale. So until large enough turbines were available to justify the huge upfront cost of developing the floating platforms, for the platforms that are needed for the floating turbines, it hasn't been economically viable to do so on the West Coast. And that's partly because of the topography or the bathymetry, the underwater topography of the West Coast just drops off so much more dramatically than the East Coast. So for the massive 15 to 20 megawatt wind turbines that will be used on the American Pacific, 1 hour of power generation from one turbine can power the average Oregon home for an entire year. So just 2 of the massive Pacific turbines that we're looking at for California would produce more energy than all of the fixed offshore wind turbines currently operating on the East Coast combined. Just 2. Next, please. So these are big, and I think visuals help to understand the scale. A 15 to 20 megawatt turbine will be roughly 530 feet tall from the hub to the hub of the rotor. So that's as tall as Big Pink, the tallest building in Portland, if you're familiar. The blades extend another 400 feet. So a floating platform on a turbine of this size would require about 5,000 tons of steel for one platform and fill an entire soccer stadium, as pictured here. California's goal of developing 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 would mean 250 20 megawatt turbines, so the largest that are currently being designed, and 250 platforms built in a relatively short amount of time. That's equivalent to an Eiffel Tower worth of steel every week for 5 straight years, starting in 2025. And as of today, I think we're about 10 business days away from 2024. So it's going to be around the corner. Next slide. To be able to support this rapidly approaching demand and then the floating offshore wind supply chain and fabricate these massive components locally, as I mentioned, we're partnering with the Port of Portland to begin planning a new custom manufacturing facility specifically designed for this purpose. So our new facility will be able to accommodate 400 workers and apprentices. And then components that are manufactured in the Portland metro area will be shipped down the Columbia River, through the Columbia Bar in Astoria, into the Pacific Ocean to staging and integration sites like those that are currently being developed in Humboldt Bay and Long Beach, California, and onto their final destination at the BOEM lease sites up and down the coast. Maintenance operation ports and onshore power substations closer to the lease sites will create additional family wage jobs and economic development opportunities up and down the Pacific coast. We're hoping to leverage federal DOT MARAD funding and other federal incentives, including clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to local and state support to make all of this possible. Next, please. So focus right now on California, obviously, because that is where there is such a huge sense of urgency. In addition to Oregon's goal of creating 3 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030, California has a goal of 5 gigawatts that I mentioned, and 25 gigawatts by 2045. So a recent report from E2 estimated that California's offshore wind market alone could create and support nearly 175,000 jobs and add $45 billion to the economy. This is an artist rendering this picture of Pier Wind at the Port of Long Beach, California. So the state of California is investing almost $5 billion into this new 400-acre facility for offshore wind turbine assembly, so staging and integration. The Port of Humboldt County near Eureka in Northern California is even further along. They've just gotten through their NEPA process with a new 180-acre facility. So I've had several discussions with their leadership team behind both of these projects, and they've all stressed that even with the huge investment that the state of California is making, they really cannot do it alone. They need our help. That's the good news. These ports will focus on staging integration for components manufactured elsewhere. So they're still expecting that the initial components are going to have to be imported from Southeast Asia, just because the US supply chain will not be ready by the time that they need. So how long that remains true is really up to Oregon and Washington, and how much we're willing to scale up to help meet this demand and help support the domestic supply chain. So I've been working to help more local businesses, many of whom would otherwise be our competitors, to see what an incredible opportunity this is, and how the more that we all work together to position the Pacific Northwest as the center of excellence for clean energy manufacturing, the more we will all benefit. The reality is that my competitors are not up and down the Willamette and Columbia River. They're in China or South Korea. And if we can't collectively showcase that there is the capacity for domestic supply chain, that's going to be the reality, which would be a huge wasted opportunity. And the carbon emissions, I mean, just to imagine building something as big as I just described with coal-powered steel in China, shipping it on a coal-powered barge across the Pacific Ocean, it just really negates a lot of the benefits that we're trying to achieve with clean energy. Next slide, please. So I included this last depressing picture to really try to stress the sense of urgency. Due to climate change and drastically declining fish populations, the salmon fishing season in both Oregon and Northern California's Klamath Management Zone was canceled this year. At COP28 conference in Dubai earlier this week, or over the last few weeks, but earlier this week, the International Union for Conservation of Nature released a report at that conference that a quarter of the world's freshwater fish are at risk of extinction, in part because of global warming. So fish, freshwater, saltwater, they're in danger. And ocean energy, particularly offshore wind, is going to be an integral part of the solution. There is simply no way for us to come close to our decarbonization goals without it, given the available technology. But we still need significant support from the business community and from our elected officials to make sure that this critical infrastructure can be and is manufactured locally, further reducing the carbon emissions associated with clean technology solutions, and also ensuring that the communities impacted most by climate change can really benefit from the incredible economic opportunities that this new market will create. So that's it for me. Here's my contact information on the last slide. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alicia. I'd like to invite, oh, there's Rochelle and Robert, if you'd like to join us back on screen. I'm very grateful for all of your expertise and very information-filled presentations. We are now going to kick off the Q&A discussion portion of the event. Thanks to folks who've been submitting questions. Feel free to continue sending any questions or thoughts that come to mind as we move into Q&A by using the function at the bottom of your screen. So to kick us off, I, for one, am very interested in closely tracking, to the extent that any one person can track, all of the many federal funding opportunities available under the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm really interested to hear from you all as we're looking at the Inflation Reduction Act's incentives for industrial decarbonization and domestic clean tech and clean energy manufacturing. Curious what you all see as the most exciting opportunities and why. And maybe as part of that, what you see in terms of the best opportunity for Oregon to set ourselves up for success in leveraging and maximizing the benefits of these incentives to support clean tech industry growth in our state. Maybe I'll kick it to you first, Robert, and then would love to hear from you, Alicia and Rochelle.
Thank you, Nora. I mean, it's a real kind of big question because there is so much in there, and I guess there's so many sides to it. I look at that, of course, a lot of the IRA sort of bill is to spur demand side in a way, at least from when it comes to the my industry or the sort of HVAC industry. And I think that is great But what we're seeing is that they're also recognizing they got to go back and help support the R&D, help support, especially with these where people that can start building and making sort of heat pumps, as just even from a national defense point of view, recognizing certain technologies are so important to our own sort of safeguarding our independence, as we talked about earlier. So for me, I'm excited that I really do think the Department of Energy, I think they've had a number of years that they've been preparing for this moment. And I say that when I go back and look at how much work went into energy efficiency around light bulbs, and then looking at different fuels, and at some point in time they had to just incrementally kind of offer improvements and incentivize the industry as a whole, which has done great things. When they had the chance, if you probably looked at how much they've worked under this time, as soon as they've had this opportunity, worked tirelessly to get funding opportunities out the door, like so much that it's been tiring from a sort of an entrepreneur's point of view, who's trying to take, basically get resources so that we can grow and scale. I feel like this last year, it's been a year of nonstop going after potential resources. And this is another round right now where there's some amazing opportunities to support clean tech manufacturing, development, and new products that people have in mind that could make an impact.
Thanks, Robert. Alicia, do you want to chime in with your thoughts next?
Sure. I mean, the thing that really stands out to me from the Inflation Reduction Act is that thankfully it's technology neutral. So there were a lot of things that we were really excited about, specifically for Oregon, like pump storage, hydropower, that wouldn't have been incentivized in the past with policies that really focused on onshore wind and solar, and not really thinking that there's a broad array of complementary technologies that we would consider, clean energy, or supplementary to the wind and solar. Pump storage is essentially like a gravity battery that can be used with wind and solar. So I know there's a great project near Klamath Falls at Swan Lake that is a pump storage hydropower project that we were really excited to partner with the developer on. And because of cost inflation and material, disruptions, supply chain disruptions, the project was paused indefinitely, and basically the budget doubled from $900 million to over $2 billion. But now, thanks to the credits available in the Inflation Reduction Act that can be applied to that project, it's actually moving forward. And there's even a domestic content incentive. So another 10% tax cut for the developers if they're buying content that is domestically manufactured. So that gives us a real competitive advantage to be able to be a supplier for this project, instead of having, a lot of these huge steel tubes, similar to what we were just looking at for offshore wind, imported from China or Southeast Asia. So really a great opportunity to leverage some of these incentives from the developer side to really think about onshoring a lot of the components for these big projects, which is great.
Yes, thank you. Rochelle, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add kind of from the ecosystem perspective, because that's where I kind of work as well, is looking at there is still a lot of opportunity for a lot of funding to come through. And I will say that the White House, it's whitehouse.gov/clean energy/inflation reduction or dash, that is a fantastic resource, because it does tell you by topic area, and you can jump into it and see how long they're looking at funding opportunities as well. Some of them are still out multiple years. So this is multi-year funding or multi-solicitation, or it's coming down the pipeline still. So you can kind of map that. What I'll also say too is just going back to my co-opetition consortia, this is the perfect time to be looking at maybe some of those topic areas for Oregon to say, hey, we're already kind of leading here, or we have all the resources here. Let's start talking and bringing people together around this topic area a little bit more, and even starting those conversation and discussion groups now, so that when the solicitation drops or when the next round of funding comes in as well, I think then you can be really poised to go after it. And I think that's one of the impacts that we've seen from some of the innovation cluster programs, is it's allowing us to move a little bit more nimbly and say, hey, we already know what industry is interested in this. We know what type of projects they're looking at. It's helping us kind of pare down that gigantic list and saying, oh, right now we don't have anything here. Maybe eventually we would be doing it, but we're not just chasing after everything. You can look for those areas. And then the other piece that I'll just emphasize, because this is one that we're looking at, and looking for partners on, or looking to help support in any way that we can, recently announced, but won't be due for a full year, is the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants. There's a ton on around environmental justice, community engagement pieces of the IRA that I think also are longer term conversations and community and economic development building. So I think those are other great opportunities to look at what has been highlighted and where your organization, your industry, your specific company can play, and then trying to find others that can go after it together, because those are the strongest applications.
That's super helpful. And yeah, I really appreciate you noting, Rochelle, the multiple different timelines. I think there certainly, as we've heard, is a lot of urgency in the sense that we know companies are looking to leverage these incentives and figure out where they're expanding or setting up shop. We want to make sure to meet the moment. And we also have a longer time horizon, specifically when we're thinking about some of the tax incentives, right? And taking the time to really map out a game plan, figure out where we want to prioritize and be strategic as a state makes a lot of sense. I see a question in the chat related to Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunities. I might kick this to you first, Alicia. The question is, how can small communities along the coast take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act opportunities? And you came to mind given you're focused on offshore wind, but welcome any other ideas you might have as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I mentioned this task force thinking about offshore wind in Oregon and really making sure that the coastal communities aren't negatively impacted by that and do have an opportunity. And labor has really, the union, the labor organizations have really been taking a lead here and thinking about workforce development and making sure that there's the capacity for these coastal communities to be able to upskill or train skilled workers to be able to take advantage of these jobs. Specifically related to the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a great question and one that I admittedly am not an expert on. But I would think that the overall economic opportunities that the Inflation Reduction Act creates should definitely be able to trickle down to coastal communities if they're working very closely, with these organizations thinking about workforce development and how to really make sure that those jobs stay local.
Thank you, Alicia. Maybe building on that, one other related question for you to consider is, do California's policies differ from Oregon in terms of better enabling offshore wind? And I might add, if there's anything that you're seeing from Willamette Technical Fabricators side of things in terms of the opportunity and how state policies or coordination might support that.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things California is doing really well, and I just got back from the Floating Wind USA conference in San Diego. I was wearing my DOE researcher hat, so I got to talk to a lot of people who are probably opening up to me more, thinking about informing DOE instead of thinking about me as a potential supplier, which was great. Elephant in the room is California has a lot of money and a lot more than Oregon or Washington to just throw at these problems. So we've got to work with what we've got. They've done an excellent job of engaging the tribes and thinking about community benefit organizations and how to make sure that tribal youth are benefiting from these opportunities and that tribal sovereignty is really being respected. So I'd love to see more of that in Oregon. But specifically about supporting manufacturing, I think two things. One is something that I have been saying, and I know Robert has said and testified with me about R&D credits, specifically for incentives. So we need R&D credits that all manufacturers, not just semiconductor industry, can benefit from. And I actually had a chance to testify before our Senator Wyden and the U.S. Senate Finance Committee in D.C. about this and how Congress's failure to renew a 70-year-old federal R&D tax credit means that I now have to amortize my eligible R&D expenses over 5 years. instead of deducting them the same year that they're incurred. So my Chinese counterpart got to deduct $2 for every dollar they invested in innovation last year, and I got 10 cents. So it's really tough for me to compete with Chinese labor costs and cheap coal-powered steel as it is, on top of this kind of disproportionate encouragement. And California as a state is really recognizing that and trying to offer state level incentives. We don't have those yet. And then permitting reform, I think, is also really critical because we have this lack of shovel-ready industrial land, and thinking about the kind of clean energy infrastructure that it's going to take for something like floating offshore wind. The amount of investment that California is making in their port infrastructure is staggering. But I'd love to see Oregon recognizing that obvious return on that investment, even on a much smaller scale.
Thank you, Alicia. Robert or Rochelle, anything you'd like to add? Okay. Taking that as, we'll move on to the next question. Thank you for that thoughtful response. Robert, maybe one for you. Just again, really appreciate you laying out the complexity that goes into even, a single company and thinking about manufacturing these innovative technologies. Aris is clearly on the cutting edge of innovation when it comes to high performance, low emissions appliances. Curious if you could share more in terms of Aris's technology as it applies to commercial or industrial applications, if that's something you're thinking about. Similarly, in Oregon, we're really focused as a state on supporting housing affordability and increasing housing access. So maybe in addition to that, if there's anything you might share in terms of the opportunity for multifamily housing, that would be great as well.
Yeah, for sure. When I sort of started this, I was focused on the needs of single family and retrofit, especially because that was what I was sort of developing the solution for. But what I realized as I was developing it was that the approach I was taking, which was to create a more modularized system, and actually some of the innovations that we're doing, and I was kind of answering one of the side questions here, was really looking at what the problems holding back what I saw was as superior technology from this marketplace. And a lot of it had to do with business innovations and recognizing that what people need, building owners, homeowners, or builders, what they need is a more complete product, and that it's not a hardware problem. There was some good hardware out there, but it wasn't what the people needed. And so as I went down sort of this path, I started looking at larger buildings and what started innovating on top of sort of the innovations for single family, and realized that as the buildings got bigger, the problems that I was experiencing trying to get sort of business as usual heat pump systems into my home, which was that they wanted to run multiple refrigerant line sets and to head units that were not really responsive to the zone that they were in. Also, we needed multiple heat pumps, that they just got worse when we got to the building size got bigger. So that's actually when I started developing concept around how we could address the needs for multifamily much better, is what the DOE, and especially through this debt prize competition, was really responsive to. And I think that's actually what we're doing next, is we are building a prototype of what I call a thermal plant pod, which is centralizing some of the production of thermal energy for heating, cooling, and hot water into one place, but then decentralizing portions of it into different multifamily so that we add resiliency into the system, so that they're not reliant on one centralized system for everything, especially if there's a need for backup or maintenance. But that overall, we can serve those units better. And it's kind of gotten crazy because I thought, well, bigger buildings, someone else is handling them, warehouses or sort of commercial buildings. But what I found is that no one's coming to them with a really holistic solution. And it's kind of getting to the degree where now I'm looking at larger and larger buildings because people are coming and saying, I need something better. We're also looking at greenhouses and other places where people are using a lot of energy to control their indoor environment, both humidity. So yeah, I mean, there's huge opportunity and need. And I think one of the things that, from the federal government, they do realize multifamily is one of the hardest things to decarb, because the building owner themselves is sometimes not attached directly to the costs that are there. And so we actually have a multifamily owner in town that has a bunch of properties, and one of them has like old electric resistance ceiling heat, and they want to transform. They want to make it better because their tenants are paying, you know, $500, $600 a month in heating during the winter, and they're probably not that comfortable still, right? They're heating their ceiling. And so, but what's it going to take for them to be able to change and help their you know, their clients, the people that live within their properties, lower their bills? It's going to take a lot of different people working together, right? And it's going to take a better system that ultimately lowers costs, upfront costs. Financing has to be in play, low cost financing, and that's one thing that I'm excited about. Is there are places like Puget Sound Credit Union who actually helped inspire me in the beginning, because I actually got some financing for my solar and I asked them if they had do like heat pumps or energy efficiency, and they did, and I realized that within the Pacific Northwest there is a lot of support if it could be drawn together to really shore up what everyone wants to do and where we want to go. And I think there's some other great lending institutions out there that are doing amazing stuff. So I'm excited about that, specifically about how we can take on larger buildings and more commercial spaces.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Robert. And thank you to our attendee for the question. Building off of what you were just starting to get into in terms of, you know, how we can better support Oregon businesses that are, you know, looking to expand, looking to set up shop, looking to stay in Oregon in the clean tech sector. Wondering if you all could expand on, you know, specifically what you see as the support existing businesses in our state need to become national and hopefully global leaders in the clean tech industry and economy. Alicia, you mentioned some of this as well, but with that, maybe Rochelle, you want to kick us off with this one, and then would love Robert or Alicia if you have anything else you want to add on that.
Happy to, and I think I'm going to steal a little bit from Washington for this one, for this answer, but I also think there's opportunity, kind of building up what Alicia said around R&D tax credits. That's something also that Washington State, I think it was only implemented for biotech for a little while, and that expired and sunsetted. And that's a piece that is brought up all the time as a piece of legislation that could really incentivize emerging technologies to start in our locations and keep production and manufacturing and research development in there. Along those lines, and actually also connects into Robert's, and so I'm going to say that now before I forget that piece, and then I'll go back to R&D. Through our Washington State Clean Energy Fund, it's been around for about 10 years now, and that fund has funding for loan and credit unions. Craft 3 is one. I think Puget Sound Regional Credit Union is the other one, main one, to do those, to incentivize those solar loans and upgrades. So anything that could be similar in Oregon, I think would be helpful. Additionally, through that same bucket of funding, there is research, development, and employment grants for Washington companies around clean energy. And that has spanned the gamut. That has been kind of technology agnostic as well. So it's another place where, as long as it's a priority within the state, it's an opportunity for earlier stage companies to move that one valley of death over to a pilot project or deployment. And right now, the program is within our capital budget, so it does have to have kind of a physical thing, and it usually has to be within Washington, but slowly throughout the process, they have built in flexibility so that as long as there's some economic development benefit or economic benefit coming back to Washington State, it can also be deployed somewhere else. So if the initial market is with an indigenous Alaska Native group, they can do that deployment out there, as long as a majority of it was built in Washington State, and it can give some specific examples if needed. The other thing that program has expanded to is some around grid modernization, some things around transmission or transportation emissions reduction pieces. So I also encourage, if going down that route, be flexible with the pot of funds that comes out of it, because it really can go to incentivize and collaborate with federal funding coming in, as well as keeping it nimble so that you're able to support all types of innovation coming through, and not just saying you're only supporting this type. As with my Clean Tech Alliance hat on, that's our biggest thing that we promote is our clean energy fund, and and we're able to with our Big 10 organization because it is helping so many of our organizations, and it's applicable to all different types of technology development and deployment. So that's the piece that I will say on that one, and let someone else give their response too. Thanks.
Super helpful. Thank you, Rochelle. Alicia or Robert, anything that you would add to the comments you've already made around what support Oregon businesses need to become national and global leaders in the clean tech economy?
I had a couple more thoughts related to workforce, because I know this is really going to be the bottleneck for a lot of businesses. And we're already, I think there's, widespread efforts to address our housing shortage. Where are these workers going to live? We've got massive childcare issues, which are taking people out of the workforce because they can't find or afford childcare. And that's not just young workers. It's also very skilled, especially tradespeople that are grandparents that are leaving the workforce early to help their kids raise their grandkids. So childcare support, child tax credits, that's something that's definitely needed to help address the workforce shortages. And then programs like Future Ready Oregon to work directly with employers for training funds, especially direct on-the-job training funds for really specialized training. I just saw a Bloomberg article. It was like the hottest job in the US, pays $80,000 a year, no college degree. It's a wind turbine technician. So these are great jobs, but they do require some training, and it's very expensive for employers to be expected to do all of that on their own. So whatever support we can get will just help expedite the skilled worker shortage solution.
I'm gonna echo everything that Alicia and Rochelle said is on point. I'm just gonna maybe leave it with this one thing. I think because things are complicated, and especially I think about the manufacturing side of things, and it's not just clean tech manufacturing, but just any manufacturing in general. When I went to look for sort of resources and the kind of things that we need, which is like things that people haven't really thought of, that like a makerspace for manufacturing would be super helpful to access common resources, including loading docks, things like that, that like you don't think of as being super needed and hard to get if you're a small business. What we need to do most is systematize support. So instead of, I think there's an approach to take some resources and then dole them out and then hope that that organization, whoever gets it, is proficient at putting them in play. And that might have kind of worked in the past with general sort of economic development. But when it comes to climate tech, it's not going to work at all. The pace that we need to innovate and iterate and improve and get to market is so fast that if we don't have comprehensive, systematic support, that also addresses all the other needs, right? That we need to be inclusive, that we need to train people at different parts and bring them in from different areas. That's what we're falling behind in most of all. And I think about this, hopefully the new legislation that's working its way through, and that the idea and what my hope is that by creating a task force, that task force could look at what's the system that will support. And I know that there's stuff that's been done in Washington, New York, California. Why they're being successful isn't because they just said we want to do more or we want to put in more money. They're saying, what is the system to support what we want to do? And one benefit Oregon has right now is we can learn. We can like, again, I'm applying to programs in California and in New York, and because that's where the support and the system is in place for what we're trying to do. We can learn from those and get the right things in place quickly, and hopefully then also create a mechanism for funding, because if you just allocate it every time, it's a slow process too, right? You need a fund that you can work against, but you need a system so you can deploy those funds. That would be, I guess, what I'd leave it with.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate you bringing us back to the legislation that Rep. Levy mentioned earlier. And I was reminded of this when you were speaking, Alicia, as well, around workforce development and training. I would be remiss not to emphasize this bill will be reintroduced in the upcoming 2024 Oregon legislative short session. And something that we recognized in thinking about what the funding needs are is exactly that in terms of retraining, right? If we're looking to be successful in not just attracting, but really sustaining and supporting existing companies in the state as they're looking to pivot or retool. We have to make sure that we're being really strategic and thoughtful about also supporting the retraining of workers that goes along with that. So really appreciate all of those comments. And I know OEC is very eager to see progress and for the legislature to get that bill across the finish line this coming session. I think we have time for just one additional question. So I'm going to round us out maybe with just a continuation of this conversation around workforce, and specifically want to come back to some of what you noted, Alicia, in your presentation. Willamette Technical Fabricators has done a really impressive job of thinking about and advancing an equitable, clean energy economy and maintaining a diverse workforce. You mentioned on the job training programs, partnerships with community-based organizations to offer high-skill, high-wage, high-demand career opportunities for the communities that need them most. So my last question is maybe a big one, but welcome you all to take whatever you're most eager to respond to, which is, what recommendations do you all have for companies and maybe also the state as far as supporting a more diverse workforce, and also partnering with communities and workforce agencies and the public sector to make sure that as we're expanding our clean tech economy, we're simultaneously working to drive benefits of this sector growth into impacted communities and working to make sure that the clean tech economy is also equitable. So it's both kind of workforce development and ensuring diversity there, but building on that to think more broadly around supporting an equitable transition to a clean energy future. And we are getting pretty close on time, so I just ask for maybe some final quick thoughts on that, and then we'll wrap up today's presentation. I'll kick it to you first, Alicia. I'm not able to hear you. Well, try Rochelle if you want to kick us off briefly, and hopefully Alicia's sound will come back.
Yeah, I'll just say one statement. I think as we're thinking about helping emerging technology companies connect in, I think that's the biggest piece, and that's one of the things that we've been more recently focused on is if you're building out an emerging technology company, you're not aware of a lot of the resources and all of those, especially around workforce, that you can connect to. There's so many programs, there's so many people already working on this. We need to connect industry into those existing programs. We don't need to necessarily create the wheel. We need to make sure that they're aware of it and that they're then able to go into those communities and work with those communities and work with those community-based organizations, because they're not going to be able to do it on their own. And if they think that they have to do it on their own, they won't do it. They won't do that extra step. They'll just do the normal way. So how do we incentivize them or do that outreach too from our sides to say, hey, here are the resources. That's what we have a newly hired workforce development specialist, and that's really his whole job is talking to our existing industry and finding out what kind of jobs they need, and then saying, hey, actually, Snohomish County STEM is already doing this. They want to have you in their classrooms. Let's make sure you're connected and in there, because sometimes it gets really myopic when you're trying to run a startup or a small business or emerging technology company. You don't have that that lens to learn from, but it's out there. And so holding up those folks that are already doing it well, and like what Alicia has already done. I can't wait to introduce you to our workforce development specialist, because he needs to know what you've already done, and it's connecting those dots too, sharing and learning what we've already done.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay. I was just going to say all of the things that Rochelle just said are absolutely true. And when we're talking about creating a more equitable economy, it's really creating generational wealth and creating job opportunities and business opportunities for a more diverse pool of business owners. And I think women have even more challenges, and people of color have even more challenges than the average small business owner in getting access to capital. And a lot of this technology is really capital intensive. So thinking about a green bank or ways that the state and local governments can really support diverse business startups in the clean tech industry, that would be incredible.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you all so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. I'm going to welcome OEC's Executive Director, Jana Gastellan, back on to wrap us up.
Thank you. Thank you, Nora, for such graceful moderation. And thank you to all of our panelists. This was such a rich and inspiring conversation, and I'm so grateful to everyone. I also wanted to give a special thank you to Governor Kotek's office for also participating today, and just wanted to note that the governor, when she was in the legislature, was a big champion of clean economy development as well. And as we march through this decisive decade of climate action, we're going to continue to need that leadership to capture all of these opportunities that were outlined today. But thank you for that participation and for that collaboration as well. I also wanted to say thank you for the generous support of our members. OEC brings Oregonians together for solutions that work for today and for future generations to come. Please continue supporting OEC and considering supporting us as we stand strong for Oregon's environment. With members by our side, OEC has worked for more than 50 years to address critical issues like toxic air pollution, water scarcity, and the impacts of climate change. Please check out our website, www.oeconline.org, to learn more about all of our work. And also, please be on the lookout for our next forum in March, Rural Ingenuity and Infrastructure Innovation. Although the media accounts often highlight what divides us, urban and rural stakeholders are working together to electrify vehicles, sequester carbon, plan for wildfire recovery, and upgrade water infrastructure. This event will also showcase efforts to leverage federal funding and protect farmers, ranchers, foresters, rural communities, and our natural resource economies against impacts. Thank you again to everyone who participated, for asking such great questions, for bringing great information to all of us. May you all have a joyful holiday season as well. Thank you.